So when you think of the Roaring Twenties, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Jazz music, maybe? Flappers? The booming stock market? Yeah, that's the popular image, right? A decade-long nonstop party. But what if I told you that behind that glittering facade, there's a way deeper, much more complicated story? A story of a nation pretty much at war with itself. So let's peel back those layers and find out what was really going on. And that really gets to the heart of what we're exploring today. Was this decade just one big celebration? Or was it something else entirely? A time of deep, deep paradox that actually set the stage for the conflicts that would shape the America we know. Let's dive in and find out.
Okay, so to really get a handle on the 1920s, you got to rewind just a little bit, to the moment right before it all kicked off. You see, World War I completely changed the United States. It turned America into the wealthiest, most powerful country on the entire planet. But, and this is a big but, the American people were just tired. I mean, totally exhausted. Not just from the war, but also from this really intense period of progressive reforms right before it. All they wanted was a break.
And that feeling, that craving for a break, well, it got a name. During the 1920 presidential election, the Republican Party came up with this really simple but incredibly powerful promise for a nation that was just plain worn out. And believe me, this one promise would go on to define the entire decade.
And here are the words themselves, straight from President Warren Harding. He said, "America's present need is not heroics, but healing. Not revolution, but restoration." You hear that? This wasn't some call to action or a grand adventure. No, it was basically a call to just calm down, to get back to a simpler time before the war. It was the perfect political slogan for the moment. It just nailed the national mood.
Okay, so normalcy. It sounds good, right? But what did that actually mean? Like in the real world? How does a vibe, a feeling, turn into actual government policy for things at home and for how America deals with the rest of the world?
Well, for starters, let's look at foreign policy. Normalcy basically meant America was going to turn inward. It meant isolationism. The U.S. straight up rejected the Treaty of Versailles and said no thanks to joining the League of Nations. A lot of Americans felt like they'd been duped into fighting World War I, and they were determined not to let that happen again. They wanted to stay neutral, period.
But here's where it gets interesting. It wasn't a complete retreat from the world, not at all. It was more of a selective isolationism. For instance, the U.S. hosted these huge naval disarmament conferences. They loaned billions of dollars to help rebuild Europe. They even signed a pact that was supposed to outlaw war forever. So yeah, they were still involved, but it was all on their own terms. No strings attached.
All right, let's switch gears and talk about the economy. Because if normalcy abroad meant keeping to themselves, at home it meant one thing and one thing only: unleashing American business. And this is where the roaring part of the Roaring Twenties really kicks into high gear.
And honestly, nothing sums up this whole vibe better than this classic quote from President Calvin Coolidge. He said, "The chief business of the American people is business." I mean, it doesn't get much clearer than that, does it? The government basically took a big step back from all those progressive reforms. The thinking was super simple. If business is booming, America is booming.
And this pro-business attitude, mixed with some absolutely incredible innovation, sparked a revolution in consumer goods. Just think about Henry Ford's assembly line. It's the perfect example. He figured out how to make cars so cheaply that they went from being a luxury toy for the rich to something the average American family could actually own.
And it was way more than just cars. All of a sudden, American homes were being filled with these amazing new gadgets, things like electric irons, vacuum cleaners, and of course, the radio, which basically connected the whole country like never before. And what powered this whole new consumer world? Two things: advertising and a brand new idea called buying on credit.
And the results? They were just staggering. Get a load of this number. From 1922 to 1929, the real income for an average person jumped by over 30%. People had more money than ever, and they were ready to spend it. The economy wasn't just doing well, it was, without a doubt, roaring.
But, and you knew there was a but coming, right? Here's the twist. While the economy was roaring ahead, American society was starting to crack. All this change, the new tech, the new money, all these new ideas, it wasn't happening everywhere at the same time. And what it created was this massive cultural divide. A nation literally split in two, sometimes by nothing more than a city limit sign.
And this chart right here shows you the exact moment it happened. The 1920 census dropped a bombshell.
For the very first time in American history, more people were living in cities than in the countryside. Now, this wasn't just a number on a page. This was a seismic cultural earthquake.
Because you see, these two Americas had completely different sets of values. On one side, you had urban America. It was all about diversity, consumerism, and new kinds of social freedom. And on the other side, you had rural America, which was desperately holding on to tradition, to religious fundamentalism, and to this deep suspicion of anyone or anything new or foreign, a feeling we call nativism.
So throughout the 1920s, these two competing visions for America didn't just hang out side by side. No way. They clashed, violently at times. It was like a battle for the soul of the country, and it was fought on a bunch of different fronts.
Let's take immigration, for example. The cities were becoming these vibrant, multicultural melting pots, but to a lot of people in rural areas, that looked like a threat. And that fear, it fueled a huge rise in nativism and, chillingly, a rebirth of the Ku Klux Klan, which this time expanded its hate to target not just African Americans, but also immigrants, Catholics, and Jews.
Then you had the clash between science and religion. In the cities, modern science was taking hold, and that led directly to these huge public showdowns, like the famous Scopes monkey trial, which was all about teaching evolution in schools. It was modern science versus the religious fundamentalism that was the bedrock of rural life.
And this deep national divide meant that even people from the same group could have wildly different experiences. Just look at African Americans. In the urban North, you had the Great Migration fueling this incredible cultural explosion, the Harlem Renaissance. But at the exact same time in the rural South, the reality was still the brutal, day-to-day existence of segregation and racial violence.
So when you take a step back and look at the whole decade, what do you see? You see something that's impossible to slap a simple label on. It was a time of incredible progress and bone-deep fear, a time of liberation and repression.
When it comes down to it, the Roaring Twenties wasn't one single story. It couldn't be. It was a whole collection of contradictory stories all happening at the same time. It was a wild party happening right next door to a quiet prayer meeting. It was this constant simmering battle between the future and the past, between modernity and tradition.
And that leaves us with one last big thought. You had prosperity and prejudice, freedom and fear. The entire decade was a paradox, holding all these opposites together in this really fragile balance. So the real question is, how long could a nation that was so divided, so at odds with itself, how long could it really keep roaring?